Well, Oregon football has lost its first commitment in the 2025 class. We're going to break that down, talk about what it means and what's next on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Just in case you're new here, I'm Max Torres, and I'm glad to have you guys along. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. We're going to be talking some Oregon football recruiting. As you know, I always love to do. It's Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, coming to you from Long Beach, California. And we got some news to get into today. We definitely have some news to get into today. But before we do that, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching today's episode. You can find the Ducks Dish podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, or you can find me on YouTube at Oregon Football. Max Torres is the name of my channel. So let's get right into it, you guys. It's not always good news when it comes to recruiting. That's just the nature of the beast. And no team is immune to decommitments. And Oregon had one of its top commits decommit on Tuesday as 2025 Pflugerville, Texas Weiss High School wide receiver Adrian Wilson has decommitted from Oregon, choosing to reopen his recruitment. Before I get into my thoughts on this and what it means for Oregon, I want to read what Wilson posted on social media. You know, recruiting can be super toxic, not just in terms of stuff that happens, but more so like what fans have to say. So I think it's always important to start things like this by putting the players' words out there first. And then that way we can kind of just move forward in I think a smooth way. So Wilson posted on X, formerly known as Twitter. He said, quote, "After a lot of thought, consideration, and conversations with my loved ones, I am making the decision to reopen my recruitment and decommit from the University of Oregon. I would like to thank the staff at Oregon for all the lessons they have taught me over the time and everything they have done for my family. I would also like to thank all the coaches that have continued to recruit me during the time I was committed. I would also welcome coaches that aren't yet or stopped recruiting me to buy stock now. I am looking for a school I can call a home away from home and a staff that is like a true extension of my family and is committed to me. Thank you." All right. So that is what Wilson had to say in his decommitment note, if you will. Going to throw some highlights of Wilson up on the screen while we kind of break this one down and talk about what it means for the Ducks. So, just off the top, Wilson is a really talented player, very talented player. I got to see him in person for the first time in January out in San Antonio, Texas at the National Combine. Just very fluid receiver, great route runner, super athletic guy with great ball skills. Certainly a guy that is going to give you a highlight whenever you throw the ball his way or he gets the ball in his hands. So this is a really talented player that I enjoyed watching and covering during his commitment to Oregon. He had been committed to the Ducks since July of 2023 and actually was committed to TCU before he ended up announcing his commitment to Oregon. So wherever Wilson commits next, he is going to be committing to his third school. So not really commenting on that. I'm just saying that's kind of the reality of the situation, that this will be the third school wherever he ends up committing to that he has been committed to. And I think a lot of times you see a decommitment and a lot of fans are quick to take the sky is falling approach or, what happened. But I don't think that this is a tremendous loss for Oregon. And I don't say that to say that Wilson isn't a good player, because I just told you this guy is talented. He is incredibly talented. But I say that this isn't necessarily a big loss, in my opinion, or kind of my 2 cents, for a couple reasons. I think the first one has to be the caliber of talent that Oregon is recruiting at wide receiver in the 2025 class. When you recruit at the level that Oregon recruits, when you have a staff that is operating under Dan Lanning and Marshall Malco, the way that this staff is operating, a move like this doesn't catch you off guard. So you're prepared. That's the communication, and just you know what's happening with your top guys. And then number two, piggybacking off of that preparation point, you have so many guys that you're going after, and you have a very good sense of, hey, this is our board, these are our top guys, these are our backup options, or whatever it is. So I think Oregon's got plenty of options that they are still actively recruiting. And some of those guys, heck, are even going to be on campus in the near future. And let me tell you, it has just been so dry from a recruiting news perspective. I expected that in February, but there hasn't been a whole lot to talk about. So I'm just glad that news is happening again. You even have some transfer portal stuff going on, and college basketball and college football. So there's some news to talk about, which is good. But we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the names that you want to watch here if you're an Oregon fan moving forward at wide receiver in the 2025 recruiting class. But then the second reason that I don't think that this decommitment is a big loss for the Ducks, look at the talent that they have on this roster at the wide receiver spot. I think I've talked about how wide receiver recruiting has really improved in recent years at Oregon. Junior Adams has obviously done a phenomenal job, but I'm even talking before that when Brian McClendon was the wide receivers coach, excuse me. But not only do you look at the guys that Oregon recruited in 2024, right? Jeremiah McClellan flips from Ohio State. Ryan Pelham flips from USC. Dylan Gresham, longtime Oregon commit, Arizona and USC gave chase late. Jack Ressler, 3-star guy who comes from a national powerhouse in modern day out here in Santa Ana in Southern California. And you also added Evan Stewart, a former 5-star guy from Texas A&M, out of the transfer portal. So all of those guys have joined or are going to join the Oregon roster just since the end of last season. But then you also have to look at who the Ducks were able to add in 2023 and even before that. 2023 was a pretty light haul at a wide receiver, I guess you could say. Obviously, Jurion Dickey, the lone 5-star commit for the Ducks in the 2023 recruiting class, he was the headliner of the wide receiver haul. But you also got Kenyon Sadiq. I understand he's a tight end, but he's a pass catcher, so he helps you out there. And then you also had Ashton Cozart. Now he's at SMU, I believe, making it back out to Texas. So Oregon didn't go very heavy at wide receiver in 2023, at least in the high school rankings. But then you bring in Gary Bryant Jr. from the transfer portal from USC. You bring in Trayshawn Holden from Alabama via the transfer portal. You bring in Tez Johnson, who's going to be a star for you. So there's talent on this roster, and we haven't even seen what a fully healthy Jurion Dickey looks like. And he's a guy who's got some people excited, certainly has Will Stein excited if you listen to his media availability after Oregon's second spring practice in Eugene. So the sky is the limit for Jurion is essentially what Stein was saying. And we also haven't seen Kyler Casper. And he's an interesting one that I'm really going to try to keep a close eye on this offseason. And when I get out there to Eugene, I kind of want to see how he's doing for that last week of spring ball, because he reclassified from 2023 to 2022, but he's now been in Eugene for 2 years, and we haven't seen We haven't really seen him be able to break through and kind of carve out a role, but that's no slight to him. That's an incredibly talented and crowded wide receiver room. And then Justice Lowe is another name to mention there in the 2022 recruiting class. Lake Oswego guy that the Ducks were able to flip late from Utah. So there are no shortage of options just on the roster. Obviously, for 2024, Adrian Wilson wasn't going to impact the Ducks in 2024, but you're looking farther down the line into the 2025 season and kind of who's maybe going to be with the team then and going to be able to impact them. Also worth mentioning that Gatlin Bear committed to the Ducks in 2024, but he's not going to be with the team until 2026, I would think, after his mission trip. So those are kind of the guys that you have kind of in the mix here that you're thinking of from a on the field or waiting in the wings perspective, if you will. The only other guy that the Ducks have committed at wide receiver in the 2025 class is Dallas Wilson, and he is coming out of Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay Tech High School recently got bumped back up to 5-star status, and that's a dude. That is an absolute dude. But I think that if you had to choose between the two guys, between hanging on to Dallas Wilson or Adrian Wilson, I think you're going to take Dallas Wilson. They're both incredibly gifted players, but I'm going to give my edge to Dallas Wilson. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is because of the Florida pipeline that Oregon's trying to build. Oregon has been very well set up for recruiting success in Texas, in the Lone Star State. Where they haven't been able to have a tremendous amount of success, maybe if not just from a number standpoint, is Florida. They get a guy, every cycle or maybe one every 2 cycles, but if you look at a lot of these top tier programs, they have guys from Florida. So that should tell you how important it is for the Ducks to get back into the Sunshine State and really do some damage when it comes to recruiting some of these top guys. So all that said, Dallas Wilson, phenomenal player. Also someone who was on campus for a junior day visit. It was either late January or early February before things went dead. It is going to be difficult, capital D, to hang on to Dallas Wilson. Is it impossible? Do I expect the Ducks to lose him? Not necessarily. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just trying to say that when you lose a guy that's already been committed to you for a little bit, in Adrian Wilson, it becomes that much more important to hang on to the guys who are committed to you and at that position and from Florida, from the other side of the country. Just the longer that it goes, there's going to be more hype around his name. He's going to have a great senior year, and it's going to be difficult to hold on to those guys because Miami's going to go after him. Florida State's going to go after him, probably Florida as well. Just because those are all the in-state programs, and why wouldn't you go after one of the top wide receivers in your state? And then you also have all those SEC programs, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, that are right there. So Oregon has to kind of keep that in the back of their head, keep that communication, and keep it strong. So I think that they'll be doing everything they can to hang on to Dallas Wilson, but I think that they are in just fine shape because of the talent that they already have on their roster. And then the second part, the top names, the guys that they are recruiting still have not stopped recruiting in the 2025 class. And we will get into those names right after this. Little sip of coffee here on a Wednesday morning. Glad to have you guys along for the Ducks Dish podcast. Thank you for being here and thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you're thinking about Oregon football, Oregon recruiting, or hey, if you want to try to toss in a mailbag question for a future episode, you can do that in the comments or by DMing me on Twitter at @mtorresports. So what's next for Oregon at wide receiver? Where do the Ducks go from here? I'm going to be starting with a name that a lot of Oregon fans probably know quite well, and that is 2025 wide receiver Isaiah Mozee out of Lee Summit North High School in the state of Missouri. I don't think they actually say it out there. Maybe they do say it like that, but I'm just having a little bit of fun. 6'1", 185-pound wide receiver. He is ranked a 4-star recruit on the 247 Sports Composite, and I've got his highlights rolling here on the screen if you're watching along on YouTube. And Mozee has been out to Oregon multiple times, and that's a guy that has been closely linked to Oregon during his recruitment and comes from Dan Lanning's home state of Missouri. So kind of like I've talked about in the past with Tosh Lapoy recruiting a guy like Jericho Johnson or Matthew Johnson more recently here at a De La Salle in the 2025 class. I feel like those recruitments maybe just mean a little bit more because that's your home area. You want to be able to go back and lean on your connections, lean on your relationships, maybe even some past coaching jobs to try to help you assemble your roster. And I think that Oregon could have the inside track here with Isaiah Mozee for a reason just like that. I learned in one of my recent interviews with Mozee that Lanning actually coached with his dad in the high school ranks before he became one of the hottest names in college football for any coach. So when it comes to recruiting, you look for any little thing that can give you an edge, any little thing that can give you an advantage. And connections matter and relationships matter. So my 2 cents on this is that, Lanning's just kind of like, kind of just like another member of the family probably in this recruitment. So I think that could really help Oregon here. And if you're watching the tape, you can see that Mozee's incredibly gifted. You see him doing some work here on the tunnel screen, also able to stretch the field and blow by the secondary to beat you over the top. So this is a really talented wideout, kind of a little bit of a lightning in a bottle type of guy. Really fun to watch, see him and what he can do with a football in his hands. And then you see he's also technically sound as a route runner as he blows by the DB there for another long completion to get his team set up inside the red zone. So Isaiah Mozee, probably the wide receiver that I'm feeling the best about for Oregon in the 2025 class that is not currently committed. So if you don't know Isaiah Mozee, now you do. And I'm telling you that his recruitment is absolutely worth following if you are an Oregon fan. The next name I'm going to talk about here in the 2025 class is another one that I think a lot of Oregon fans are probably familiar with. It's 2025 Arizona wide receiver Cooper Perry. And Cooper Perry also doubles as a lacrosse star, and he is doing a lot of lacrosse right now. So that's a high level athlete. Lacrosse is not an easy sport. I played it a little bit myself. I was in 3rd grade, so I wasn't a star by any means. I mean, I couldn't shoot that thing to save my life. I had one goal, but I found myself as more of a defensive guy, more of a defensive guru when it came to lacrosse. But we're talking Cooper Perry, and Oregon's got a really good shot with Cooper Perry. I have him predicted to commit to Oregon. I wrote that story back in late January, and Cooper Perry is out of Scottsdale, Arizona, Notre Dame preparatory, and this is one of the best wide receivers in the Western region. The last time I checked, he was the #1 recruit in the state of Arizona, and Oregon has done a really good job recruiting the state of Arizona. Just look at Elijah Rushing in the 2024 class, 5-star edge rusher. And then the Ducks also got guys like Amari Washington, Michael Gardner, and then previously Cole Martin out of the state of Arizona in previous classes. But as we know, Cole Martin has transferred to Arizona State. Case in point, Oregon definitely has its eyes on top players in Arizona, and you can see that Cooper Perry is a straight up playmaker, ripping off huge gains and just doing some special things at the wide receiver position. He is expected back on campus in Eugene next month in April when spring practices are back underway for another visit. Believe he also has his official visit to Oregon scheduled for the month of June. So everything is going well, it looks like, in Oregon's pursuit of Cooper Perry. He's doing the right things, saying the right things, and he is making it a point to stick around Eugene. There was also a picture I posted on my Twitter account earlier today where Luke Moga, the true freshman Oregon quarterback, got to spent some time with Perry. It looks like he went to one of his lacrosse games because Moga is back in Arizona on spring break, but they got a picture together throwing up the O. So I know that those two are very close from my time covering Moga's recruitment coming out of high school. And then we know that Dan Lanning is someone who made the trip out to Arizona, as well as Brian Michalowski, who is an Arizona native. So I think they're doing the right things here when it comes to recruiting Cooper Perry. I think if you asked me who Oregon's biggest threat was here, I would probably say Oklahoma. I know he took a visit out there earlier this year out to Norman to see Brent Venables and the Sooners. And that, I believe, is the only other school aside from Oregon that Perry has an official visit scheduled to for the summer months. But still, I think Oregon is at the top for Cooper Perry. I think he's pretty high on Oregon's board as well. So we're going to have to continue monitoring this recruitment to see if there's any new developments. But with the official visit scheduled, with his trips to Eugene scheduled, I think that Oregon sits in a great spot for Cooper Perry. And again, that's a guy you got to know if you don't already know. If you don't know, now you know, is what I'm thinking there with the Notorious B.I.G. song. Let's talk about another name out here on the West Coast. I mean, I don't want to only talk about West Coast guys, but you gotta talk about the West Coast because California is a huge pipeline state for Oregon in when it comes to recruiting. And this guy that I'm going to talk about now, I'm loading his highlights right now. He's always been a big name on the West Coast, but I haven't seen him tied into Oregon all that closely, all that heavily. We're talking about 2025 Mission Viejo, California wide receiver Philip Bell. Philip Bell is actually from Northern California, but he transferred down to Southern California to play for Mission Viejo and won a state championship with the Diablos in 2023. He's a four-star guy, number 129 nationally, number 17 wide receiver, and number 12 recruit in the state of California, according to the 247 Sports composite. He's going to be taking a trip out to Oregon next week, actually. I got to see Philip Bell at the Under Armour Next camp in Los Angeles over the weekend. He took home MVP honors for his position, and he continues to solidify himself as one of the best receivers nationally. And I asked him about what's the vibe with you in Oregon? You know, what's kind of the story with you in Oregon? I haven't heard a lot of buzz, haven't seen you guys linked too much. But he told me, quote, I feel like the coaches still talk to me a lot. They come to the school. Dan Lanning came by. He's just a real coach. He was just saying how he has to get me back up there. So we're making it happen next week. And then I asked more about his connections with the coaching staff. And he said, quote, my connection with Coach Junior Adams, I feel like it's not the best, but it's a pretty good one. He's from the Bay Area. I am too. So I feel like we can relate there. I haven't been there in maybe a year and a half, 2 years, but last time it just felt real. And I'm definitely excited to get back up there. And I think this is an important visit for Oregon to get Bell back on campus because, like I said, and like he said, he hasn't been to Oregon in a while. And seeing that he's a top West Coast guy, you're going to have a great shot if you're Junior Adams because you're a West Coast guy yourself. And look at what he's been doing at the position, getting guys like Troy Franklin to be the most successful or most productive wide receiver that Oregon's ever had. And now he's going to be going in the NFL draft. That's going to be another feather in his cap, working with guys like Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. Philip Bell told me that Oregon is one of those schools that he thinks can definitely get him to the NFL. And that's going to be important. So I'm not trying to say I know how this is going to go, but I think my guess is he'll go to Oregon and it'll be like an eye-opening visit or something that helps them make up ground in this recruitment. And that's going to be important and ultimately trying to stay in the mix here until Bell makes his decision. He's going to be making his decision sometime before his senior season, after his official visits, is what he told me. So there's a lot of ground here. This is a pivotal stretch in really any rising seniors recruitment, right? Any 2025 recruit. This is a big time for them because they're getting out to schools that they've maybe never been to or haven't been to in a while, or showing up again at another school that they have gone to quite a bit. So my 2 cents with Bell is probably that Ohio State is the team to beat, but there are so many schools actively recruiting him, and he is as well traveled to recruit as you'll find. So there's still a long way to go here when it comes to the recruitment of 2025 Mission Viejo wide receiver Phillip Bell. Oregon's also going to be hosting 5-star Ohio State wide receiver commit Chris Henry Jr., the number 1 ranked wide receiver in the 2026 class, for a visit in the month of April. I got that update over on Ducks Digest as well, so give that one a look. Give it a read if you haven't already. Don't want to go super long on this episode, but I do still have some other names that I want you guys to know. Decommits Moore out of Duncanville, Texas, has long been a name associated with Oregon. He's a 5-star wideout, currently committed to the LSU Tigers, the Louisiana State Tigers, with Brian Kelly and company. And he's been committed there, I want to say, since August of last year, but he keeps showing up to Oregon. He took a trip out to Oregon for those junior days that I have referenced, and the interest still remains strong. I talked to him after that visit, and he said that Oregon's love is matching LSU's. So I think that Oregon is squarely in the mix here and definitely going to do everything they can to try and pry him away from LSU. But Texas is a school that you absolutely have to watch out for here with Decommits Moore. He's the number 1 ranked wide receiver in the country. I think he's inside the top 5 players nationally, certainly the top player out of the state of Texas, I want to say. And the thing that you got to know here, Steve Sarkisian and the Longhorns do not let top players from the state of Texas leave the state without a heck of a fight. So I think Oregon is very much involved here with Decommits Moore, but I think Texas is going to be just as much, if not a bigger threat to LSU here in this recruitment. But hey, you got to just keep doing what you can, keep that contact, and keep trying to get him on campus if you can, because that is a recipe for success. Another guy to mention here, we got 2 more as we kind of get into the back end of this episode. How about Marcus Harris out of Santa Ana, California, Modern Day? Oregon has really set up shop at Modern Day, and Modern Day continues to be home to a lot of the best players in the entire country. And they got some more big time players that have transferred in this offseason. A couple of them, just to name a few. You got Dash Beerley, the 2025 Washington quarterback commit. He transferred in. You have you have Chris Henry, who I just mentioned. He transfers in from Cincinnati ahead of his junior year in the 2024 season. And then you also have a guy like Cody Green, who was the number 1 player in the state of Washington. He is an offensive tackle in the 2026 recruiting class. He made the move down from the Evergreen State, I believe that's what Washington's called, the Evergreen State, to Modern Day. And Marcus Harris has been a guy that has been on Oregon's radar for a while. He's taken a lot of trips. We've seen all the guys that have been coming up to Oregon: Aiden Breland, Jack Ressler, Brandon Baker took a lot of trips out to Oregon before he committed to Texas. As we know, Nate Frazier, Jordan Davison. So Marcus Harris is incredibly familiar with Oregon, and he's a guy that I think Oregon could ultimately land. It's just a matter of where does he fall in the pecking order of all of these talented wide receivers, because he just checked out Georgia. He's also been linked to Texas quite a bit. So I think Marcus Harris is another guy that Oregon is still very much alive for. And he's going to be getting out to Oregon, I want to say next month, and has an official visit locked in. So they're giving themselves options, which is exactly what you want to do if you're Dan Lanning, if you're Junior Adams, and the rest of this Oregon coaching staff. The last name to throw out there is one that I've talked about a little bit before, but he's still a newer name in terms of Oregon recruiting. How about Derrick Meadows? He is a very fast rising wide receiver here in the 2025 class out of Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, Nevada. He is top 10 wideout in the 25 class, top 75 recruit last I saw on 247 Sports. Really big receiver with a huge catch radius. I want to say he's listed at 6'5", 200 pounds. Oregon might have some work to do here, though. They only offered him in February. So like I said, they're a little bit newer, maybe even late, you could call them, to the mix, but I don't think that that's necessarily going to be a problem. Seems like Notre Dame is the school with the most buzz publicly, but this is a guy who has reeled in almost every offer in the country that he didn't, if he didn't already have it, that is this offseason. So the next step for Junior Adams and the Ducks, get that guy on campus, get him to Autzen Stadium, show him around the HDC and the practice fields, and show him what Eugene has to offer, and then see if you can make something happen here. I don't know what his decision timeline is, but clearly Oregon has a little bit of work to do there. But that's going to do it for me on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Couple of favors to ask you guys. Make sure you lock in with me on social media. I'm at Torres Sports on both Twitter and Instagram. Been posting a lot of clips from camps and everything lately that I've been going to over on Instagram. So give that a follow. Subscribe to my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. And then also make sure to do me a favor and share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. But until next time, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.